I'm Gary Isaacs with the Ike Pickett Show. It's time to take a break and just soak up some of the scenery in this wonderful part of the world we live in. So let's get out of here. So here we go. My formative years were spent in this country, so I'll share some stories along the way. We'll pick this one up from a place west of Ashton on the original road to Yellowstone Park. We called this Hugginsville Corner. Let's take a ride from here and have a look at more of these beautiful places in eastern Idaho, west of Yellowstone Park. Let's head up past Warm River to Lower Mesa Falls. I'll show you a road and a trail that I made 66 years ago with a lumber delivery truck with a close friend and a rubber raft. The road is still used a lot to access and float the river below Lower Mesa Falls. As a side note, one day in the winter of 1958, I was coming up this road from Warm River in my '48 Plymouth Coupe when I suddenly met a small airplane on this section of the road. It was snowing, and I was surprised to see the plane coming toward me on the narrow highway. How he ever found the road in the snowstorm, I'll never know, but there he was. He had made an emergency landing. I stopped and suggested that he leave the plane at the side of the road and ride with me into town, but he refused. He made the bad decision to taxi the plane toward town on his own. It worked for a little way until he hit a pole with one of the wings and stopped his progress. This is the north end of the Snake River Valley. These farmers are tough. They raise a lot of grain, alfalfa hay, and seed potatoes here. The growing season is only about 90 days long, but the black volcanic soil makes things grow nice and fast. We're leaving the farms to disappear into the forest here. These trees are Quaking aspens, mixed in with the conifers. They're deciduous. Their leaves turn bright yellow and are dropped in the fall. I love trees. The majority of these trees are conifers. They stay green the year round, mostly pine and fir. Let's drop down this road by the Warm River. Worm River is really a spring that belches out of a mountain about 17 miles up the Worm River Canyon. It's called Worm River because it travels so fast and it is so short that it doesn't have time to freeze over in the wintertime. It's really colder than the other rivers around here. There used to be a sawmill on the other side of this river. I grew up working in the mill. That's probably me on the forklift. This picture was taken in about 1957. This is called the Stone Bridge after the Stone family that lived here for 2 or 3 generations. It's become a popular place to launch boats for a short, rather gentle float down this section of the North Fork. When I was a kid, this was not much used. We used to ride this river about twice a week in the summer, and the fishing was good. I'm like Yogi Berra. Nobody does that anymore. It's too crowded. I got spoiled, I guess. The cube of a mountain is still called Isaac's Mountain by some of the locals. This is where the Worm River joins the North Fork of the Snake River. The North Fork comes down the canyon from the left side of the mountain, and Worm River comes down the canyon to the right. There was a railroad here that is completely gone now. The railroad used to go from Ashton to West Yellowstone. It was decommissioned and torn up in 1981. Too bad. It could have been a popular tourist rail ride up the Worm River Canyon and through some fascinating scenery along the way. Oh well, it is what it is. When I was a small boy in the 1950s, the big black steam engines came pulling freight cars through here regularly. One day I was playing by the crossing when a car pulled up to me with 2 men with hats. They asked me if I ever put things on the tracks. I said yes. Sometimes I put a penny on the rail and the train would smash it flat. Anything else? No. They drove on up the road. I found out later that the train had derailed earlier further down the tracks and they were investigating what made it do it. It wasn't me. Let's turn left here and resume our trip up the canyon. We cross Robinson Creek here, another tributary that runs into Warm River. We'll cross the Warm River here on our way further up the North Fork of the Snake River to Lower Mesa Falls. Warm River Canyon is still on the right side of the road here. This is Bear Gulch. It was the second ski resort in Idaho after Sun Valley on the western side of the state. It was a popular ski resort when I was young. They used to play music on loudspeakers that could be heard to the top of the hill. I can still hear some of it in my head. Unfortunately, they had to abandon it in 1969 for lack of business. There used to be a road from here down to the North Fork that we used to put in a rubber raft to float the river and fish. Straight ahead is the old ski run called the Bearcat that bottomed out at the lodge that used to be here. There were 3 more runs to the right, the Dipper and the Grizzly, that were accessed by the same chairlift. They were longer and steeper, and there was a beginner's hill with a rope tow just below the lodge. The opening on the left is not part of the old ski hill. It's a power line right-of-way. Okay, let's head on up to Lower Mesa Falls Overlook on the Snake River Canyon. In the 60s, my cousin Kenny Wright and I had a contract to spray trees in this section of the forest that were infested with the mountain pine beetle. We had a camp in the forest to the left where we lived in tents and kept about 20 head of horses. We used the horses to ride and pack 5-gallon cans with insecticide through the forest to treat the trees that were infected. Each of us would be on a saddle horse, with usually 5 pack horses trailing behind. The packer I worked with had a 9-year-old son that we would let lead his pack string down the side of the highway to a starting point to enter the forest. It was fun to see the tourists passing by in cars marvel at the boy riding his horse and leading the pack string by himself. I used to buy horses from a horse trader in Sugar City. He'd sell me pack horses for $100 apiece, and I would sell most of them back to him in the fall for $20 and buy more from him when spring came again. It was a good trade for both of us. They weren't hard to train. They learned fast. If one of them ever stuck his nose to the wrong side of a tree, it would jerk him hard enough that he'd never do that again. Same with the mares, of course. We're turning into the parking lot here at Lower Mesa Falls. This is a campground on the north end of the overlook. At the end of the campground, there's now a road that takes off toward the river canyon. This is the road that wasn't there before 1959. There was no road here when we drove through the grass between these trees to get as close to the river as possible. I wanted to ride and fish the river through the Whitewater Rapids just below the falls, and there was no access that far up the river before this time. After we made this trail the first time, it became used a lot. The Forest Service called it Truck Trail and put up a sign at its beginning. So let's drive down there again today. This is where Hubert and I slid the rubber raft down the hill over the sagebrush to the river. Now it's well traveled, as you can see. There's a well-worn path down to the river now. The sagebrush is gone. I have to admit that on this trip I let the raft wrap around a rock. All the time I was growing up, my dad made me steer the boat on these trips while he fished off the front. I told Hubert that I was not going to steer the boat on this trip because I wanted to fish the whitewater. He didn't take over for me. He never did, even when we were hunting game in a pickup. Anyway, I let the boat drift wildly while I cast a Colorado spinner behind the rocks in the river. Suddenly the boat came sideways against a rock the size of a Volkswagen, where it was held by the swift water bottom side first. There we were, standing on a rock in the middle of the river, having lost a lot of our gear, including a rifle and a set of knives I carried whenever we were out somewhere. I sure missed those knives. Hubert looked at me with a startled look, and he said in his North Carolina drawl, "I can't swim a lick." It was funny to me, but he was scared for sure. That was odd because I never knew Hubert to be scared of anything or anybody. I was used to the river, so I left him on the rock while I made my way through the rapids to the shoreline somewhere downstream. Long story a little shorter, we tied some rope together along with some canvas strips to make it longer, and I pulled him through the rapids to the shoreline. He took on a lot of water on the way, but he survived. Then we had to walk out. We got some help the next day, and I tied the end of the long rope on myself and got in the river upstream from the boat and made my way to the rock. While others pulled, and I pried, we were able to free the boat and ride it the rest of the way down the river. Okay, back to the parking lot. If we walk a bit from here to the overlook, this is what we see. This is Lower Mesa Falls. Of course, there's an Upper Mesa Falls about a quarter of a mile upstream from this falls, but that's a story for one of my other videos on the Ike Pickett Show. I'm Gary Isaacs, and this is the Ike Pickett Show. I hope you enjoyed the trip today. I know I did. I always do. Open my website now to learn more and be prepared for what's coming. Knowledge is power. Read or listen to my books, Standing Up to the Coup and Searching for Bitcoin. In the meantime, keep in mind who you are and why you're here, and sleep peacefully at night knowing that your integrity is your own responsibility and that your Bitcoin are in your own custody.